Hello, I'm Jared Taylor with American Renaissance. We are a nation of immigrants. It's astonishing how many people trot out this slogan as if it were a serious justification for immigration policy, as if it actually meant something. I'm not an immigrant. I bet you're not an immigrant either. I guess we're just not part of the nation. So far as I can tell, people who say we are a nation of immigrants are saying that since we have let in immigrants in the past, we should keep letting them in. This is actually a well-known logical fallacy known as the argument from tradition. It's like saying we've always done it this way, so we shouldn't stop. Of course, most of the people who make this argument despise tradition and would never use it to justify any other policy. How about basing policy on slogans that, unlike this nonsense about immigrants, are actually true? We are a nation of male presidents. We are a majority white nation. The people who say we are a nation of immigrants would think it was absurd to base policy on those true statements. But when it comes to immigration, and only immigration, they are perfectly happy to let the past dictate the future. But they are dead wrong about the past. To be an immigrant, there has to be a country to go to. If you settled Antarctica, would you be an immigrant? No, you'd be a pioneer. Were the Jamestown colonists immigrants? Unlike Antarctica, there were Stone Age people living there, but they didn't welcome the newcomers with food stamps and bilingual education, did they? About 10 days after the English chose their campsite, hundreds of Indians attacked them and tried to exterminate them. That's worse than trying to settle Antarctica. So, no, the colonists were not immigrants. Now, once there was a nation, yes, there was immigration. From 1790 to 1820, the U.S. population grew from 3.9 million to 10 million. That's 250% growth. Lots of immigration, right? Wrong. That population increase of 6 million was almost entirely due to natives having children. At the end of that period, only 1% of the population was foreign born. 1%. We were not a nation of immigrants. And if the founders wanted immigrants, they wanted white immigrants. The very first Congress of the United States met in 1790. The Constitution had just been ratified. It was a brand new country, and Congress had to decide what kind of country it was going to be. And that year they passed the very first naturalization law that restricted citizenship to free white persons. The founders wanted a white country. Later on, immigration did pick up, and it was immigration from Europe.
Well, welcome back to the John Fredericks Radio Network. You're on with Colonel Mike. On the line with us, special guest today, David North of Center for Immigration Studies. And you just heard a little clip about America. Are we a nation of immigrants? David, are you on the line?
I am on the line. Good to talk to you, Colonel.
All right. Thank you very much for calling today, sir. I was looking at one of your articles recently, and you do a lot of investigative work on visa mill schools, immigration coming through what I call the front door, which is airports, Dulles, Reagan, Baltimore, Boston, New York, California. And basically, instead of the wall being built in Mexico, we should be concentrating on front door illegal immigration or visa mills. David, share with our listeners today some of the stuff that you write. Also, you know, where it is today in the government, in the sites of the government, the Congress, what's happening, Grassley Senate Committee, so on and so forth. Thank you and welcome to the show.
Thank you, sir. Well, I want to talk about visa mills, which you just mentioned, which is part of the immigration problem that we're facing. It's a hidden one. We hear an awful lot about a wall, but we don't hear about the people who come in through the airports, like you suggested, sir. The situation is this. Marginal foreign students, not the best and the brightest, pay marginal U.S. educational institutions, places you've never heard of, good money in exchange not for education, but for both a visa and to the United States and this is important, a chance to get a U.S. government-subsidized job. There are dozens of these places. I call them visa mills, and tens of thousands of jobs lost to Americans of college age. The employers of the foreign students and the recent foreign alums, are excused from the payroll tax that everybody pays, but they would have to pay that tax were they to hire an American for the job. That's right. If the employer hires an American, he pays payroll tax. If he hires one of these foreign students, he doesn't.
Who passed that bill? That was Congress?
What did you say?
Who passed that bill? Who allowed that? The Congress?
Well, allowed perhaps, but the second Bush administration, followed by the Obama administration, created something called optional practical training, and there is no statute at all that supports this. And this optional practical training isn't training at all. It's simply a subsidy for recent foreign college alums. The first year for most of them, for some in the high tech fields, it's 3 years. But during that 1 year or those 3 years, the employer doesn't have to pay payroll tax for hiring this person.
Wow.
Nor does the foreign alumnus. He or she doesn't have to pay either.
Well, what is Homeland Security doing, David?
The system, which is created not by Congress but by successive administrations, which essentially discriminates against American college grads. It's amazing.
What is the Homeland Security doing about this CVIS or ICE or DHS?
Not much. The optional practical training program, I'll call it OPT from here on, hasn't been changed at all, and there has been very little suggestion that they're thinking about that. They may well be, but they haven't done anything about it. And they really haven't done very much about these visa mills either, though they could. And I'd like to explain how that problem can be solved.
What type of visa is it?
It's an F visa, F1. Mm-hmm. An F1 visa is for foreign students.
Mm-hmm. Is that related to an H-1B?
Some people move from an F1 to an H-1B. That's a perfectly legitimate move. But they're two separate schemes. H-1Bs are for foreign workers, generally college graduates, and F1s are for people who are studying at the college or graduate school level.
And how many of these visa mill schools do you think are in the United States, or do you know?
Probably a dozen, 20, 25, something like that. There a couple of very prominent ones in California are the Silicon Valley University and Northwestern Polytechnic University. Mm-hmm. These are reasonably big places, 6,000 students, all of whom are foreign, and all of whom have an opportunity after they get their degree to work full-time in the American economy in a subsidized job. Subsidized job that American graduates don't have a chance to get.
David, name a few in the Metro D.C. area, right outside of Washington.
Well, there were a couple that were closed by the state government in Virginia under both Republican and Democratic administrations. They were the College of Northern Virginia, the University of Northern Virginia, mm-hmm. and the American College of Commerce and Technology. One's in Annandale, and the other was in Falls Church. We continue to have Virginia International University, which is, among other things, part of a Muslim cult, which is hard to believe. And we also have in the Washington area California University of Management and Science, CALMT. Both of those are very marginal institutions and are frankly justifiably in trouble, and I'd like to talk to you a little bit about that trouble.
Please, but first I want to ask you, the state closed these two schools down. Do you mean the government? Was there an agency? Who closed them down?
Well, there's something called the SHEV, the State Council on Higher Education in Virginia. Uh-huh. It's a quasi-independent agency of the state government, been around for a long time and been doing a good job.
And you mean to tell me that DHS or ICE did not close them? It was a state agency?
I mean exactly that.
Oh, my God. So we're paying all this money for the protection of see something, say something, Homeland Security, and they're not even acting on it. That's what you're saying.
There are different parts of Homeland Security that are doing things at different rates. Mm-hmm. And I would say that the SEVP, which is a Student Exchange Visitor Program, which is the part that should be doing this, is operating very slowly. Some other, or maybe not operating at all. Mm-hmm. Other elements of ICE and U.S. Citizen and Immigration Services are moving right ahead and doing some useful things, but this piece is not.
So what happened at American College? Why did they close them?
American College of Science, of Commerce and Technology, was closed by the state because it had lost its accreditation from a national entity, mm-hmm. and was showing signs of abusing professors who should not be teaching to be teaching particular classes, was not keeping good records, was generally behaving very badly in terms of the education that they offered and the sense of discipline that they ran. They were a very sloppy operation, and eventually the state caught up with them.
Wow. Very good. All right, so let's speak about what you want to speak about. Tell me the schools you want to talk about.
Well, I want to talk about the overall system where Secretary of Education can do something about this.
Okay. And that is, her name is, what's her name?
Betsy DeVos.
Okay, Betsy DeVos. She's not a well-liked person in the administration. She's not well-liked as a secretary. What can she do to make it better?
Well, one of the things that these visa mills need is an accreditation from an accreditation agency that's recognized by her department, the U.S. Department of Education. Mm-hmm. And many of these places had only been accredited by something called the Accrediting Council of Independent Colleges and Schools, ASICS. That was put out of business by Secretary DeVos's immediate predecessor, Secretary King, in the last few days of the Obama administration, and it was put out of business because it had been much too lax. Mm-hmm. Was very, 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 very careless in terms of the people, in terms of the institutions that it did accredit. So the Obama administration did the right thing, kind of late. It was in December or January of that term, and so that was the organization that allowed allowed accreditation for these marginal universities, these visa mills. Now, what has happened since is that ASICS wants to come back. They're still around. They've still got $6 million in their treasury. Mm-hmm. They want to come back and continue to do this sort of work. And Ms. DeVos has set up a meeting in May, which will decide whether or not it's going to be revived in terms of its recognition. And my strong feeling is it should not be revived. It should stay dead. And this will be very hard on the visa mills, and she can do that.
Well, let me ask you, David. There was a gentleman named Gray that ran that operation, if I recall. He was in the Washington Post. He was grilled one time at a congressional hearing, a former president named Gray, correct?
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Right. Former president of ASICS, you're saying?
Yes.
Yeah, that's right. They've gone through a number of leadership changes recently. And this is an organization which is, unfortunately, tied to sort of the worst of the private for-profit higher education
so it's pay for play,
including visa mills and some others that weren't visa mills.
It's pay for play?
And the government shut them down in the last days of the Obama administration, and all Secretary DeVos has to do is simply leave it there.
Okay, let me ask you, David, is this pay for play?
Don't change things. Keep ASICS unrecognized, and then it in turn will not be able to accredit these lousy schools, and the schools will eventually lose their state licenses, and once they lose their state licenses, the Department of Homeland Security will sort of notice, sometimes weeks, sometimes months later, and take them off the list.
All right, hang on a second.
That can issue the visas.
So this is a pay-for-play organization. You become a member. You put like $10,000 or $20,000 a year in their pocket, right, to be part of this accreditation, and it's pay-for-play, and they look the other way, correct?
Well, yes, you could put it that way. That's right.
Okay,
That's exactly
because
right.
they probably have an auditing committee in such an organization to make sure that these people are doing what they have to be doing in order to be accredited. But apparently this state agency in Virginia called, what did you call it? What was it? Chev saw that ASICS wasn't doing their job and had to close these schools that were formerly accredited by ASICS, correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
The schools had been well, in the case of the University of Northern Virginia, it got accreditation and then lost it from.
All right, hang on. We got a caller on the line. Stay with me. We got Ken from
Absolutely.
Leesburg. Ken from Leesburg. Welcome to the John Fredericks Radio Show. You're on with David North of CIS.org and Colonel Mike. Go ahead, Ken.
Thank you very much. Just from my standpoint, the problem really is the influx of low-skilled, in some cases, illiterate people from the southern border. And what I'd like to ask the speaker, which I've been dying to ask somebody for a long time, are two questions. One, the big business interests really under the Bush administration and probably all the administrations did not want border security. They wanted everything weak to get low-skilled labor.
Absolutely.
Why wasn't more done to increase the number of visas from the Philippines, which has a guest worker program? And you have, a lot of poverty there, and you have a lot of poverty in other Asian countries to bring folks over. And then the second question is, did the Obama administration really weaken the 287G program so local sheriffs and police departments could not train deputies? Because that's the storyline that I've gotten here in Loudoun County.
All right, Ken, what is your background? Ken? Hello? Did we lose Ken? I don't hear him.
Well, let me pick it up from there. He is talking about the immense corporate pressure on all administrations not to enforce the immigration law. It's not all corporations. It's typically in agriculture, for instance, and in construction, that those employers would rather hire illegal aliens than Americans because they're cheaper and they're docile. And so there's a very strong, and the caller was exactly right about this. There's a very strong pressure against any administration against enforcing the immigration law when it hurts this particular class of employers. So he's very right about that. That's a continuing problem. As far as guest worker programs, there are some of those. They are I think problems. H-1B is a guest worker program. I'm not in favor of expanding them for the same reason that I am in favor of enforcing the immigration law on the illegals.
All right, David, let me give you my point of view. My point of view is what he brought out one country. He specified one country, which was the Philippines. Now, I will say this, and I'll say it sarcastically. We have a habit, very bad habit, of stomping on so-called allies. They're allies when we need them. Let's say, for instance, we take the Philippines. Majority of that country is poor. There's a lot of highly educated people, but they do well in call centers and they do well in nursing, okay? They send labor around the world. They become au pairs or whatever, the Middle East and so on, and one person supports 6 people. That's the Philippines' way of doing business. Why aren't we bringing in more nurses? I don't know. I think we don't bring enough people from the Philippines to become educated here because their educational system is not bad. You know what I'm saying? In fact, their call center system has now been taken over by South Asia. Indians set up in the Philippines to do call centers. So it was a different kind of situation with the specific country. But he's right in general. I wanted to know what his background was. We're coming down to the last minute, David. I'm sorry. I would love to have you on again. It was just a nice conversation. Anything for the last minute? Go ahead.
I would like the administration to pay more attention to some of these nuanced issues like the visa mill as opposed to the great big symbolic issues like the wall. And that's what I hope will happen.
That's what I think should happen.
And maybe it will.
I think it should happen, and I'm glad you brought up all these things. We'd love to have you back on again. That's David North of the Center for Immigration Studies, www.cis.org. Visa mills. I mean, he's really great at writing what he's doing. Thank you for being on the John Fredericks Show, David.
You're welcome. You're welcome, sir.